What is going on to all my MCU fans out there, and welcome to today's discussion. As you all can see from the title of the video, we're talking all things the Thunderbolts with an asterisk, which, by the way, we'll talk about that asterisk a little bit later in today's spoiler discussion. That's right, we're breaking down the entire film, the beginning, the middle, the end, the character breakdowns, what worked, what didn't work for me personally, the ending, the 2 post-credit scenes, the future of the MCU, and so much more. So this is going to be a fun discussion. I love doing these. We had a full hour-long discussion about Sinners a couple weeks ago. Thank you all for listening and watching that video, and hopefully you all can enjoy this video. So before we get into it, I do have a non-spoiler review available on my YouTube channel. We're going to get into some non-spoiler thoughts at the beginning of this video before we really dive into the nitty-gritty of it all. So if you haven't seen the film, check out the non-spoiler review. Stick around for the first part of this video, then watch the movie, then come back and join the conversation. And with all that being said, as far as joining the conversation, let's get the conversation going in the comments now. This will be available on my YouTube channel, but also available to listen at your own convenience in podcast form on Apple as well as on Spotify. So let's get the conversation going now. What was your anticipation going into this film? Who was your favorite character going in but also coming out? What did you think about the flow of the film, the direction, the pacing, the acting, the highlighted moments, the things that didn't work, the ending, the post-credit scenes? And you don't have to give me your 36 film rankings of the MCU, but let me know in the last, 2 phases 4 and 5, where does the Thunderbolts land on your list? I'll share mine a little bit later, but let's get the conversation going in the comments below. And also all the YouTube podcasting stuff, hit the like button, share the video, share the audio, subscribe to the channel, follow me on the audio, and again, let's get the conversation going in the comments below. So let's kick this conversation off. We're talking about where I stand with the MCU as of this video. I've only seen the movie once, but where do I stand with the MCU? And also, what were my expectations going into seeing the Thunderbolts? So currently, as I'm recording this video, I am still a big fan of the MCU. I'm not in the camp that the MCU is dead since Endgame, everything's garbage. I'm not in that camp, but the MCU in the last 4 or 5 years, it has its criticisms. It has its highs and it has its lows. I'm not going to use Secret Invasion, but either way, as far as the most recent projects, I didn't really enjoy Daredevil Born Again. I didn't cover it on the channel because I was covering Severance and White Lotus and, Invincible and all the other movies we talk about here on the channel. So I wasn't the biggest fan of that show. I'm excited for season 2, but it was just a Frankenstein of a season and just so inconsistent. And just, again, we're not talking about Daredevil, but I just wasn't the biggest fan of the most recent season, or to say the rebirth of Daredevil in the MCU. Last MCU show I loved, and this isn't really MCU, but X-Men 97 was great. Agatha was okay, hated Secret Invasion, but low-key, season 2 was probably the last thing I loved from their television department, which was, 2023. As far as movies go, I liked Deadpool and Wolverine, didn't love it. I did a full breakdown of that on the channel, so you can check out my full thoughts if you want to go back on the archives, but it was okay. The Marvels, the less we talk about that, the better. No, it was, I don't hate it as much as other people, but it was forgettable besides the post-credit scene. Last Marvel movie, MCU movie I love was probably Guardians 3, which was, 2023. But with all that being said, what does that mean? What were my expectations going into Thunderbolts? Well, to answer that question, when they announced this, I want to say it was either at D23 or at Comic-Con in 2022, almost 3 years ago. I was excited. I like the director and the creators behind this project that have worked on things like The Beef, which is on Netflix, or I should say Beef on Netflix. They worked on The Bear and other A24 projects that I was a fan of. So I like the creative team behind this project, and also like the people in front of the camera for the most part. I would say half the cast I'm a fan of. Yelena, we'll talk about Florence Pugh here in a second. I'm a big fan of that character. I love Bucky, more particularly the Winter Soldier, but I love Sebastian Stan and what he means to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being an OG of this franchise. And I also like David Harbour as the Red Guardian. We'll talk about Ghost and Taskmaster a little bit later, but all in all, I was excited for this film because it felt like it was going to be a grounded movie, going to have a contained story, but also talk to the greater MCU. So nonetheless, I was looking forward to what the Thunderbolts had to offer. Now, after having seen the film, before we get into the nitty gritty and breaking down the spoilers, my initial thoughts coming out of the theater, I've only seen it once. I like the movie. Didn't love the movie. I don't think it's the best thing since Endgame. I don't even think it's, the top tier movies in the MCU, but it's a really solid movie. And we'll get into my, real deep thoughts in a second. But performances, characters, I really enjoy the dynamic of the team. I love Florence Pugh as an actress. Been following her since she popped up on the scene in the wrestling movie that doesn't come to mind right now, but I'll put a screen grab of the movie I'm talking about on the screen now. I loved her in that. Loved her in Midsommar, Little Women, and she's just, in my eyes, I think she's 28, 29, might be 30, but as far as that, actors under 30, she's one of the best, if not the best, in my opinion. So her is Yelena, one of my favorite new additions, starting off in Black Widow and of course in Hawkeye and this. She is just fantastic. She was the star. This was really her movie. This was her vehicle. She led the story narratively, also the leader of the team in a sense, and also this was essentially Black Widow Part 2. And I'm okay with that because I didn't really love Black Widow. I think the first half is good, second half not so much. I like the dynamic between her and Natasha and the rest of her family, but I love Yelena. I talked about Bucky a little bit earlier. I think Sebastian Stan is a fantastic actor as well. I really like the arc that we've had with Bucky. I miss Winter Soldier, and we'll talk about getting a little glimpse of that in this film, but I'm a big fan of Bucky. I love that he's still in the MCU, and we have more stories to hopefully tell with him in the future. And again, David Harbour. I'm a fan of Red Guardian. He's kind of like the Drax of this situation, the funny, lovable teddy bear, but he can also throw some hands, but he's mostly used for comic relief, so I like him. So the dynamic of the team, and as I'll talk about later, as someone that wasn't a fan of a Ghost, wasn't a fan of a Valentina, I wouldn't say I wasn't a fan of John Walker, but I wasn't a fan of how they didn't really flesh the character out as much as I wanted him to be fleshed out in The Falcon and Winter Soldier. But overall, the character that I was intrigued by, in this film, I like John Walker. So again, the dynamic of the team, the individual performances, the creative, the direction of this movie was really done well. The writing was done well. The themes that we'll break down a little bit later of depression and loneliness and having people on your side and what that means and asking for help. I love the themes of this film. Thought it looked really well. I'm a score head. I love the score in this film, and it was a character within itself. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, as far as my expectation, this was a grounded Marvel film. It wasn't worried about the multiverse and worrying about the spectacle of it all. Yes, it has some good action set pieces, but again, it was more grounded to the story that they were trying to tell, but also it did a good job of managing the MCU of it all, right, and tying it to the MCU, as we'll talk about in this breakdown. And it felt like that we were building to something, right? Very similar to what we did in phases 2 and 3. So I like that. But as far as criticisms go, and we'll get more into it in a second, thank goodness the second half was great, because the first half wasn't terrible, but it was some pacing issues for me. I didn't really engage with the stories in the first half and everything that was going down. It kind of felt like a paint by numbers, formulaic kind of MCU film in the first act. And we'll break it down what I mean more in depth a little bit in a second. But the second half saved this movie. Love the third act that we'll talk about. And as far as other things, I didn't really care for some of the side plots that we have in this film. For example, Mel and Bucky trying to take down Val. That stuff didn't entirely work for me. But overall, like I said, I like this film. I didn't love it. It's fun. It had some great themes that I enjoyed. It didn't really hit the highest highs for me of some of the best stuff in the MCU. But again, it is much better than the Marvels. It's much better than some of the other stuff that's been kind of missing a mark of recent memory in the MCU. So with the non-spoiler portion out of the way, we're now about to dive into the spoilers of this film. So again, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Come back and join the conversation. But again, full warning, we're breaking down the entirety of the Thunderbolts. So first thing first, as we open up this film, I got to talk about it because it was really cool. It's one of my favorite MCU Marvel Studios title sequences of all time. It might be hyperbole. It's up there with me as far as ones that stick to me. And I remember, obviously, the first time you saw it, first time you see the Avengers, stuff like that is in my mind. But also my favorite Marvel Studios title sequence is probably the dedicated one that they did for Chadwick Boseman after he passed in Wakanda Forever. That one stands on another level because of the personal connection and the tragedy of it all. So that's my number one. But this is up there, man. We get the opening credits and you see in the Marvel Studios logo, they're showing all the comic book runs of the different variations of the Thunderbolts and, centuries in there. And as it flips over, you hear the audio kind of cutting out. It's kind of distorted, right? It's kind of going into the void. It comes all black. That was cool to me. Again, there's been some cool ones. This one was pretty cool. It kind of set the tone for what we got for the rest of this film. So after we get that, and again, it ties into, we have Yelena's voiceover talking about something feels wrong. And it dives into one of the biggest and most impactful things that I enjoy about this film is the connective and I would say relatable aspect, a universal aspect of what it means to deal with depression, deal with loneliness, feeling like there's not an out to situations you find yourself in, and we see that with Yelena, right? She's going by the motions. She's just kind of on autopilot right now. She talks about she hasn't been the same since losing Natasha and everything that she's been going through with that loss in her life. As she's on this mission in Malaysia, I believe is where they were in a location. She does her Tom Cruise stunt when she jumps off I believe the second tallest building in the world, and it kind of sets her on this mission of taking out all these guards. She goes into the laboratory, and if you notice in the scene, you see the outlines of where the Void, and we'll talk about the Void a little bit later, of what he did to the doctors when he first got his experiments worked on him. But she's talking to one of the guards. He can't help her open the door with the facial recognition. And one of the scientists that worked on Project Century has a gun, and of course Yelena's not as scared. She's taking him out pretty easily, but unfortunately the doctor shoots himself in the face. She can't open the door, but before he dies, he does let Yelena know the project they were working on was a dangerous project and one that needs to be shut down. But again, he wasn't able to give her the full extent of what happened. Of course, he was trying to warn her about Bob and Century being out there on the loose. So again, it sets up this whole situation, but it just reminds us Yelena can handle her own, even when she's not in the right thought process, right? She's not right to track of mind. She has the stuff she's dealing with. She's still able to take these people out with ease. Like, it was just super easy for her to take out those guards. I could be wrong, but it kind of reminded me of when we were, obviously this isn't her first introduction, but in all fairness, this might be the first introduction to some people out there that haven't seen Black Widow, that haven't seen her Hawkeye show, or even her character. I believe she was in the most recent season of What If, but this might be someone's first time meeting Yelena, and it kind of had shades of the first time you really get to meet not Natasha, but Black Widow. When she was in Iron Man 2 fighting in that hall, I think it was a similar type of, the shot was from an overhead shot of her taking out the guards. So I could be wrong, but I feel like it was an homage to her sister and kind of introducing potentially a new audience to one of the best characters in the MCU right now, and that is Yelena. So after we get that setup, that little action set piece, and kind of getting the adrenaline going in the film, we kind of settle into one of the narratives that we have in the film, and that is Valentina. Now, of course, we met her back in, what was it, Black Widow post-credit scene, I believe was the first time we saw her, or it could have been Falcon and Winter Soldier. I can't remember the placement. I believe it was Black Widow, then Falcon and Winter Soldier, or it might have been reversed. Either way, we met her almost 3 or 4 years ago in the show, in the movie, following the post-credit scene, and then we saw her again in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Either way, we see that she is going through some situations with the government, and as they're trying to impeach her, she's currently standing as, I believe, the lead or the operational lead of the CIA, and they're trying to get her off of her term because of different things that she's been doing, some illegal operations, as they say. And again, this is where we get the continuation of something that we saw. If you all have seen, I guess, mild spoiler for the most recent Captain America movie, Brave New World, it was told to us and introduced to us that Bucky Barnes is now Congressman Bucky Barnes, and we see him continuing that narrative in this film as he is in the audience looking for what's the situation going to be, and he's in the crowd. And again, this is, and we'll talk about later, this was a plot that didn't really do anything for me. Like the Bucky being a congressman, the Valentina trying to be fired. Like I don't know if we've built to this moment of Valentina. Like, of course, in Wakanda Forever, she didn't really have these issues. Like, I don't remember the government coming. Like, I haven't rewatched that film a ton because it's super depressing to watch, and also I don't entirely love the film, and another conversation for another day, but neither here nor there. I don't feel like there was necessarily a setup for this, but either way, This is the position that she's in. She has nothing to hide, but of course we know she's doing that. She had Yelena, the first thing that we see in the film is her trying to wipe out the information, her trying to do a clean slate so the government can't find anything on her. Now, it's also established by a great actor, Wendell Pierce. He's playing Congressman Gary, who we find out later in the film is working with Bucky to try to take down Valentina. He doesn't want the government to know she was experimenting on people, and we'll talk about her motivations, a little bit of backstory that we get with the character. And I'll just say it now, this is the most that we got on Valentina in the MCU, and this is probably the most I liked of the character. The other stuff didn't work. Tonally, she just didn't fit right. Like she's trying to be this, placing her in this Nick Fury role, I should say, of being someone trying to build her own team and doing things without the government approval. Didn't really work, but I will say I liked what they did with her in this. I'm still not entirely a fan of the character, but I like what they did with her in this film, and we'll talk about a little bit more with her a little bit later. But you know what? Since we're on the topic of Valentina, let's talk about her a little bit more. And again, I like the way they used her more so than they did in Falcon and Winter Soldier, Black Widow, and more recently in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I do like that the film gave us a little bit of insight of who she is and where she stands and where she comes from, right? Not to jump too far ahead, but later in the movie, when she gets Bob and he uses his powers to tap into her memories, we see her as a young girl. Her father's trying to hide her because there was some situations going on in the town, and she saw her father die in front of her. And that put her on this path of like, there are people out there that are bad, but then there are, greater evils out there. And she's not necessarily good or evil. She's sort of in the middle, right? Like in her mind, she's doing well, right? That's what makes a good villain. They think they're the heroes, right? This is almost, obviously on the other side of the pond, but like a DC, like this is kind of in the vein of an Amanda Waller, or even sticking in the same vein of the MCU, like a Nick Fury. Like he's not as devious as a Valentina, but he gets things done in a certain way that can rub people the wrong way. Of course, we know what he was doing with the Winter Soldier film and how he was going to create the helicarriers and take out threats before they even happen. I mean, Nick Fury's done some questionable things, but not to the extent of what we've seen with Valentina, her starting the war in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, her setting Yelena to kill Hawkeye from that post-credit scene in Black Widow, and of course, the things that she does in this film and the human experimentation, all that. Like, she's not a good person, but in her mind, it's a means to an end. It's for the protection of the world, right? But at what cost? And that is the cost of experimentation and so on and so forth. So again, I like that we get a little bit of understanding. I like that the tone, this really fit the tone of the character more so than the other films. I liked her in this film, and I like how they kind of set her up and give us more context of the character. So now, after the hearing, this is where we see Valentina talking to Mel, her assistant, as she sets forth to get the ops to take out the evidence, right? She sends Yelena, she sends John Walker, she sends Ghost, she sends Taskmaster into this hidden vault somewhere in the desert, and she has Yelena, as we'll talk about. She has this really early in the film, Yelena, one of my standout moments, and again, it sets Yelena on this path and letting us know, but also her trying to reach out, trying to ask for help, but not really directly, indirectly, when she's talking to Alexei, when she meets him and she's having a conversation about, when were you happy? Do you ever find happiness and all that stuff? But she's still searching for something, right? But she's on this path of like, I'll do one more, it's the old trope of the hero. I got one more mission and I want to do something else. So she tells Al that she's going to do this one last thing, but she wants to be more of a face. She wants to do more good in the world and not just murder people left and right. So after that, Val sends her on the mission. She sends John Walker, Taskmaster, all of them to go to this vault. Yelena is there to get John. Let me make sure I get this in my mind right. Yelena is there to get John Walker, also get rid of the evidence, but also take care of John Walker. He's there looking to take out Yelena. We have Ghost, who is there to take out Taskmaster, and technically she was the only one to get the job done. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then I believe Taskmaster was there for Ghost. Or no, because Yelena was there for Ghost. Taskmaster was there for John Walker. Either way, they were all there for each other. And this is one of the standout sequences of the film in the vault, which, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the one of the first scripts, or the idea, the director said that this was supposed to be like a Die Hard movie, and it was supposed to be like in one location. And some of that script seemed to be in this film, because they're mostly in this vault. Like, this vault scene is like 20-25 minutes of the film. But as they all interact, they all show off their superpowers. We got some new upgrades, some new suits for the characters, and particularly John Walker has a more of a different, I mean, I guess it was the suit that he got at the end of the Falcon Winter Soldier with his new shield as a U.S. agent. Ghost obviously has a full makeover from the last time we saw her, and Ant-Man in The Wasp, which is one of my least favorite films in the MCU. More of the forgettable movies, and also she was just a forgettable villain, if we want to call her that. Either way, she has a new outfit, and we have Taskmaster, who we'll talk about here in a second. They have a new outfit as well. So again, we saw this in the trailer, the fight sequence, but we now have context. We know where it is in the film. So it wasn't ruined. It didn't take me out of it. I knew how it was going to play out. It was nice to see it all in its full glory. You know, we got knives being thrown. We have, you know, kicks and punches, and all the hero, or I should say anti-heroes of the characters showing off their skills. And then we have Taskmaster. So let's get into the Taskmaster of it all. Let's have a conversation about this character. We have the fight breaking out. She's about to kill somebody. Then as she's walking up, Ghost does their powers. They disappear, they phase, and they come back and shoot Taskmaster in the head, getting her mission completed and killing Taskmaster. Now, let me be honest. I am not the world's biggest Taskmaster fan. I didn't read a bunch of the character Anthony Masters from the comics. I was aware of the character, and I've read stories with him in it, but not a ton of stories. I played the character in, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom. I believe it was 2 or 3. I'm familiar with the character, but again, I'm not like heartbroken or butthurt of the adaptation or the recreation, I should say, of the character when they were first introduced in Black Widow. It was one of the weakest, if not the weakest part of that film. But again, the character is so cool. It can mimic your movements and study all the Avengers that was just on the film. It's a really cool character that was handled poorly in Black Widow. And I'll be honest, gearing up to this movie, yes, Taskmaster was in a trailer. Yes, Taskmaster was on every poster. But there was a feeling that when you really pay attention to the trailers, at a certain point, and the trailers are very, like, they laid out the most of the film. We talked about trailers on the channel before. They just give way too much away. But if you piece together the trailers enough, you're just like, Taskmaster's in none of these shots when they're in the Avengers or, say, the Watchtower. So you can put 2 and 2 together. They're going to die pretty soon. Now, me secretly, I knew they were going to die because just based on the marketing and everything they said. But I was like, I know something about the Century. I know that there's a very famous panel. I don't remember the character. I believe it was either Ares, I think it was, where they ripped them in half. I was like, if you take out Taskmaster that way, have Century rip them in half, I'm like, now we're cooking with some grease. But either way, they get shot in the head, and they're dead. They're gone. Now, I'm in 2 mindsets about it. Again, not being a diehard fan, but I'm in 2 mindsets of the death of Taskmaster. Number one, it was for shock value, which didn't really do anything because I'm like, I don't care for this character. So it didn't really shock me, right? But as far as, again, this being such a wasted opportunity of a cool character and just throwing them away. And I don't know if this was Marvel poking fun of like them knowing that they didn't do a good job with the character. So they're just like, shoot him in the head, get him out of the way, and we'll make the fans happy. But for the real fans, comic fans, or fans of the character in general, how do y'all feel about the handling, not just in Black Widow, but how they handled Taskmaster in this movie? This is, and again, not being a big fan, but I'm just looking at it from a narrative character perspective and knowing how cool the character is. It almost feels like, if it's a waste of a character, and it's a waste of a narrative. If you go back to Black Widow, again, not the biggest fan of that film, but that was a big point of that movie, was Natasha's guilt and how she felt about what she did to Taskmaster when they were a child and thought that they killed Dreykov's daughter and the blood on her hands and all that stuff. But then knowing that she was alive and she was being used and controlled, and then she saved her and freed her. And then the last time we saw Taskmaster, they went off with the other Black Widows that were freed of the control that they had and went off with Yelena. So I'm like, what happened with, she's still obviously a mercenary doing these jobs. I guess she just can't, we'll get to that here in a second. There is a narrative to I can see why they did that, but either way, I just feel like it was just such a waste. And then that's the other side of it. Like, what was the point of doing that besides unnecessary shock value that didn't shock me? But narratively speaking, there is a line in the film a little bit later where we have Ghost talking to Yelena, saying, "Oh, did you know her?" She's like, "Yeah, I knew her, and she suffered as a kid, and she died." And more or less that moral of the story was, this is us, right? We all grew up in messed up situations. Ghost was tested on as a kid. Yelena was in a red room as a kid. John Walker did his tours in the war. I don't know if he had like any childhood trauma, but they all have trauma that they're dealing with. And it all led them to be mercenaries, killers, assassins, and they ended up like, Taskmaster. So narratively, sure, that works. But again, I just can't help but to think like, what would have happened if you didn't kill Taskmaster, right? The potentiality, obviously we can't live in a world of what ifs, but that is a character you could have explored more. You could have fleshed out more. You could have applied the themes and the narratives and the allegories and the symbolisms in a character who, again, dealt with trauma, didn't really have closure, and we could have had all those moments with them, but they just decided to shoot the character in the head at a very just whatever type of a way. So again, whether you have followed the character since the comics, animated shows, video games, whatever the case may be, or the first time you met the character was in Black Widow, what did you think about Taskmaster and the handling, or in my case, the mishandling of the character? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Also, let me bring this up. Is this the last time we're going to see Taskmaster, or are we going to maybe get a rebirth of a sense, or get a more comic book version of Anthony Tony Masters in the fold at some point? Let me just add that into the wrinkle. Let's have that more. Let's add that last part of the conversation in the comments below about the future, if there's any future for Taskmaster, in the comment section. So now it's at this point in the movie where they realize they were all sent here to die, to be burnt alive, and they have to work together to get out of this vault, which they inevitably do. And this is one of the parts that I did like about this first act, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the first half of this film. Team building that they have to do, that they don't know what they're actually doing. But little thing that might go unnoticed is, I think Ghost, even though she didn't say it, she wanted to be a part of the group, right? She was the one that was able, once they broke the barrier of the sound wave, she was able to phase through the vault wall. She could have left, but she let them free. She claims it's because, I don't know how to get out. Like, you could have figured it out. You're an assassin. You've probably been in worse situations. But she's like, I need you guys' help to figure out my way out from here. And then she also gets the escape car, and she's like, I need your help. Like, I think Ghost secretly wanted to be a part of it. They all secretly wanted to be in a group. They just didn't want to say it, but eventually they did. But again, team building, putting trust in someone else. And eventually we see Bob coming up with the idea of them, going back to back and crawling up that big elevator thing, and which they eventually do. Again, it's little things of them building, trusting each other in this situation, trying to save each other's lives, that I liked that portion of the first half, which I thought, again, was a little bit slow, if you ask me. But something you also notice in this team building is the bond of the I wouldn't say it's romantic. I don't know if you guys read it romantically, or maybe in the future it could be romantically, but the friendship, I would say right now, between Yelena and Bob, who again were the two standouts to me in this film, and great performances across the board. But Yelena's checking on Bob throughout this entire thing, like, tell me, Bob, tell me a little bit about yourself, you can trust me, and yada yada yada. They're building a friendship early on, and their friendship is even built upon him knowing her memories, right? He accidentally touches her hand when the explosion happens, and he goes into her memory, where we again get to explore the depths of Yelena and get a backstory of her first kill, her first mission, I think it was, when she was a little girl, and she lured the girl into the woods, and the guy kills her, and he sees that memory, and just, again, it puts in perspective of this pain, this trauma, this lifestyle that Yelena has endured since she was a kid, man. It is really, really messed up. And again, the way Florence plays the character and the depths of the character is just so well written. I'm not going to go as far as saying that she's fully replaced Natasha Romanoff. That's not the case. I love Natasha, one of my favorite characters in the MCU. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I felt like the way that they ended her story in Black Widow, it was more of an introduction than it was a conclusion of Black Widow. But I'm not saying Yelena has fully replaced her sister, But out of all the characters that have somewhat replaced the OG characters, you know, you think of She-Hulk for Hulk. You think of Ironheart as kind of the new Iron Man. And there's other, you know, Kate Bishop for Hawkeye. She, to me, has been the best one so far. Again, not fully replacing Natasha. I haven't forgotten Natasha. Still love her. But out of all the new second wave of characters, she's been the best. She's been the most fleshed out. And it isn't surprising because, as I mentioned earlier, Florence Pugh is one of the best actresses working in Hollywood. So after all the setup here, we get the banter. John Walker and Bob aren't really clicking. You know, Bob was not feeling John, and rightfully so, because John was being a dick to him, no lie. And we see that having a payoff a little bit later when they go toe-to-toe, or I shouldn't say toe-to-toe, because it was really a one-sided fight, and we'll talk about that later. But after they managed to make themselves get out of the vault, we have Val sends her forces inside. They take them out with ease. They make it to the truck. One of the guards stops them, but then Bob sacrifices himself because there's a conversation being had. Like, he didn't want to leave the vault because he knew was inside of him, and he didn't want to cause danger or any harm to people, but he sacrificed himself. And Yelena, she fell for him when they thought that he died, and they went on about their way, but they shoot up Bob, and we see he's okay. He's not dead. He flies in the air and crash lands on the ground, which knocks him out. But at that point, they're realizing, oh, this isn't just a regular random civilian. This mofo has superpowers. You know what? Since we're on the topic of Bob, let's talk about Bob, Sentry, and The Void. All three characters, three distinctively different characters, played beautifully by Louis Pullman, who I've been a fan of since seeing him. I think the first time I saw him was like in 2016 and 2017 when The Strangers Prey at Night came out. Not a good film, but he was good in it. Bad Times at the El Royale. You have him and Top Gun Maverick. He was in a TV show that I liked the first season, didn't care for the second season, in Outer Range. He's a great actor. Also, the son, you know, if you don't know who his dad is, he was once the president in the Independence Day film and also just other great films. But either way, big fan of Louis. I thought that this was his best performance of his young career so far. Like, again, three different characters carrying the weight of someone who's so carefree as Bob, someone who is a badass, and just someone that doesn't want to cause harm but can show his full powers in Sentry, and then the complete opposite with the Void, and just the dark, the deep, the loneliness, and everything that came with the Void. I thought that Louis did such a phenomenal job of playing those three characters. And I'm going to say this, and this might be controversial. I am a huge Steven Yeun fan. Well, Ellie, what are you talking about Steven Yeun? Glenn from The Walking Dead, Mark from Invincible. If you all do not know or don't remember, Steven Yeun, great actor, he was casted as Bob, aka Sentry, aka The Void, when they announced this film. It came out that he couldn't do the film because of scheduling reasons. I believe the scheduling wasn't Invincible, but it was because he was doing Mickey 17, which, as of recording this, I've yet to see that film, but I've heard great things. But this is where the controversy comes in. I think Steven Yeun, from a body of work, I love the work that he does. I think he's a better actor, if I'm being honest, between the two. And again, Louis Pullman's still kind of newer in the game, but Steven Yeun, to me, full body work, is a better actor. That being said, I think after, of course, I can say this now, hindsight's 2020, but I think Louis Pullman was the better fit for the role. Of course, I say that now after seeing it, but I just feel like and not saying Steven couldn't have done it. You know, again, he's a phenomenal actor, but I just think that Louis, his sensibilities as an actor and the way he carries himself as an actor, again, I'm not saying I can't imagine Steven Yeun doing that, but I don't know if he would have pulled it off as well. I don't know. It might be controversial. Again, I still think Steven is the better actor just based on the work I've seen. But I think it was almost a happy accident that they got Louis in the role. And I think he was great, man. Again, you might disagree with me. If you do, let me know in the comments if you would have loved it. I mean, of course, if Steven would have been in the role, he would have been great, I would imagine. But I think Louis was the right fit, but let's talk about it in the comments below. But again, going back to the Sentry of it all, we talked a little bit about Bob, but Sentry, a character that I wasn't too familiar with. Like, I didn't read the comics. I know the characters came out in the early 2000s. He's like 25 years old, so he's relatively new compared to some of the other Marvel Cinematic characters we've gotten so far. And I knew that whenever I heard about Sentry, again, I never read the comics of the character, but loosely knew about the character. Everyone compares him to, this is the Marvel's answer to Superman, essentially, right? Has all the powers of Superman minus the alter ego of the Void. But man, Sentry, badass, with the powers of 1,000 suns, or 1,000,000 suns, I believe is what they say in the comics, and has all the things that Superman can do with flight and super strength, and also tapping into your mind and reading your memories. What a character. Sentry, awesome. Now, talking about the Void, and more so later in this breakdown, I loved everything about the Void. Like, the physical manifestation of loneliness and darkness and feeding into the negative thoughts, right? It's so relatable, and we'll talk about when we get to the scene a little bit later, but the relatability of, I think we can all relate to those inner thoughts, the not so good thoughts, right? That we talk ourselves down, we say we can't do this, we say we're depressed, it's all this stuff that we're our own literal worst enemy, and we see that here, right? The power of the mind. Such a beautiful representation of depression, and how that manifested itself in this film was done beautifully, and we'll talk about it later. But again, the Bob, the Sentry, the Void, Louis Pullman, 10 out of 10. No, I don't want to say no notes. There is a note that I have a little bit later as far as a criticism of how something happened really quickly. But minus that, narratively, performance, visually, it was just a perfect character and one of my favorite new characters of the MCU. And I'm very excited to see more of this character moving forward. And with that being said, for those that either were introduced to Sentry, Bob, and the Void for the first time in this film, what did you think about the character and how it was represented and how it was played by Louis? But also those that are fans of the comics and was very familiar with the Sentry and the Void and Bob, how was it represented? How was the first live action version of the character in this film? Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. So getting back to the breakdown and getting into some more criticisms, as I kind of alluded to, the first half, kind of paint by numbers, nothing too crazy, right? I think the first half is carried by the characters and the acting, but the story just wasn't working for me. I wasn't too engaged. I mentioned it with the vow, being in the impeachment, Bucky, Mel, all that stuff was just very bland to me. If I'm being honest, it wasn't boring. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't as great as I was thinking this film was led to be. It's just like, oh, this is just a standard Marvel film at that point in the film. But I will say I thought the performances and the banter and the group and the dynamic, that was the stuff that really kind of kept me engaged for the most part. And I will say, kind of speaking to the introduction of these characters and the whole idea of like this film potentially has a lot of homework for newcomers, meaning that all of these characters besides Bob and Mel, everyone else was introduced in a prior project, whether it was a movie or a show. Again, Black Widow with Yelena, obviously Taskmaster, Red Guardian, Val, the post-credit scene. Walker was in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Ghost was brought all the way back in 2018 or 2017 with Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's a lot of stuff to catch up to, but I think the film, at least in my opinion, and I would love to hear what you all thought about it, that didn't watch any of those movies or shows, I thought the film did a good enough job to introduce these characters to a new set of audience members, right? Like, they did a good job of laying the seeds and sprinkling in their backstory. You got an idea when Alexei and Yelena were talking early on about, oh, this is Black Widow's sister and how she feels about losing her, and obviously who Alexei is, and obviously who these other characters were as they talk about Walker, fake dollar store Captain America. If you haven't seen that show, they allude to him. Also later in the film, he loses his wife and daughter due to his sadness and his kind of depression and his big regret of what he did in Falcon and Winter Soldier, which they talk about in this movie, of him killing the innocent. I wouldn't say that terrible flag smasher was innocent, but he wasn't the one that was directly responsible for killing his friend in that show. Spoiler for that show. But either way, I think, again, I'm going back to, I think the film did a good enough job of laying the foundation to someone that might be new. But again, that's just me. I've seen all the Marvel things, so I could be saying that because I'm like, oh yeah, I knew this. But let me know if you were new to these characters, if you were able to follow along. I will say, even though I don't think it was required homework, I don't think there's nothing that's like a necessity to watch before watching this. But if there was a necessity, obviously Black Widow, because Florence Pugh introduction, carrying on with that narrative and being introduced to not only her, but Red Guardian and also Ghost and also Valentina. So out of all the projects, that's probably the most necessary to really get a full context of the character and following their journey. But other than that, I think they did a good job of doing that. But if you've seen all those movies and shows I just talked about, obviously it's more of a payoff. Obviously it's more of a continuation. There's more context. There's more of an appreciation of where these characters have come from. But again, I was just curious of how you all felt about, if you were new, if they handled introducing these characters to you, again, if you were new to these characters and this whole setup. But again, going back to my criticism, my issue with this first half is the pacing and the back and forth of when we were in the vault, which was fun and exciting, and again, their banter. But then it was cut between this, I don't think it was a charity event. I think it was just a party that Val was hosting to get people distracted off of the case and the trial that she's going with the impeachment. We have Bucky there, and Mel's there, and Bucky's trying to get Mel to help him take down Val, and how all that played out. And again, it was cutting back and forth between those two scenes, and I'm like, it feels off. Like, what's going on in the vault isn't matching what's going on outside in the watchtower. So again, a lot of that pacing stuff to me, that was a pacing issue to me, and just the cutting back and forth just wasn't interesting. It wasn't compelling, and I wouldn't say it was boring, but it just wasn't engaging to me. But then it wasn't until we get Alexei back into the picture and we find out that he overheard the details of what Val was doing, getting rid of her ops and getting rid of the evidence, which involves Elena's death, and he was the driver of the situation, and that whole thing was funny, of his side hustle or what have you. So he gets involved. He finds, and it was a funny moment because it was one of those, like, it was almost like an embarrassed child of their parent picking them up from school when Alexei pulls up, and Florence Pugh as Yelena, like, don't look at him, don't give him don't give him the time. And that was kind of funny. But again, we saw this in the trailer, which again, trailers just give away everything. It didn't take me out, but I kind of knew what was going to happen next because we saw it 1,000 times in the trailer, and that is Val's crew finds them, catches up to them, the whole Genuine songs playing, the little, stereotypical Marvel jokes, which, comedy is subjective. I didn't find this film to be that funny. There are some funny moments, but a lot of the jokes, again, in that first half and even in the second half, fell flat for me personally, but neither here nor there. They're getting shot at. In comes Terminator. I am a big Bucky fan, but I would be lying if I didn't say I wish we got more Winter Soldier, because that character is so badass. Terminator, Thanos, Killmonger, Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier is a goddamn beast, and we got a taste of that in this scene here, where he takes, he takes down the vehicles and does the whole wrapping around his arm and punching into the ground. Like, man, we need more of that Bucky. We need more of that little Winter Soldier Bucky. You know what I'm saying? A little combination of the two. He's not murdering people under control of Hydra, but he could still lay some fools out and take down a whole truck with one of his arms. I like that moment, but I will say, and this isn't a negative. This is just a little nitpick. This is where my brain goes, where I see movies, and I'm just like, how the hell did that happen? Bucky takes out the convoy, then he takes them out, right? Mind you, there's no trucks. He destroyed the limousine. He just has his motorcycle, and he took out 2 super soldiers, right? He took out John Walker, he took out Alexei, he took out Super Spy and Yelena, took out, an assassin that can phase through things and ghost. He managed to gather all them up on his motorcycle and take them to, I don't know how far away was the car accident from when they go to this garage gas station situation. How did he do that? I mean, Bucky is cool. He's strong as hell, but yeah, I'm just curious. Like, did they just willingly go with him and tie themselves? It's just the little things like that. Again, it doesn't take away a score from me. I'm just thinking that. Did you guys think the same? How did Bucky get them there? Anyway, he gets them to his garage. He tells them that he's going to use them as witnesses to testify against Val, to take her down. And they're trying to tell him, Bucky, there's this Bob dude that has flight, and he's a super soldier. He has all these powers and whatnot, and he's not listening to them until Mel calls him back and confirms everything he just told them. And this is where he frees them, and now we have a new member of the situation, and Bucky getting involved with Thunderbolts, and their plan is to go find Bob, rescue Bob, who's now in New York, who's been captured again by Valentina after he fell from the sky after flying or taking flight for the first time. All right, before moving on, I got to talk about this, and that is how did they come about the name of Thunderbolts in this film? Now, some people think that some people I know thought that Thunderbolts meant, oh, well, we're going to see the Hulk or the Red Hulk. We're going to see Harrison Ford's film. His name, even though it just happens to be the same name, there's no connection with. I mean, he's in the comics. I believe Red Hulk is a part of some iteration of Thunderbolts, but his name, their name, no association. Thunderbolts, the name comes about with Baron Zemo, who I still think could have had a way in this film, especially after they killed Ghost so quickly, or to say they killed Taskmaster so quickly in the film. But he came up with the name, and there's all that backstory from the comics. And as far as it pertains to this movie, I wouldn't say it's as poorly handled as something like Solo, the Star Wars movie from 2017 or 2018, and how they randomly came up with Han Solo's name and it was just so terrible. It's not that bad, but it ain't that damn far. The name of Thunderbolts comes about because of Yelena's childhood terrible soccer team that never scored a goal. There was something Thunderbolts, and they took on that name, and that's where they came up with the name of the Thunderbolts, because of her soccer team when she was a kid. Yeah, I didn't like it. Some other creative way. They could have come up with a better, again, this is the Marvel joke of it all, right? But I'm not saying it took me out, but I'm like, y'all could have been more creative than that, right? But as I digress, again, this is where, to me, the film found a new identity. This is when the film picked up versus the first 30 to 45 minutes, the first act, which again I thought was kind of lackluster if you ask me. But this is where the hype that I had heard prior to seeing it, this is what the film is. The second half really is where the meat and potatoes are, really is where this film finds its footing, really is some of the best stuff that I've seen the MCU in a very long time. So again, at this point, Bucky's now part of the Thunderbolts. They're on their way to New York to save Bob, to stop Sentry from coming to fruition and all that stuff, and stopping Val. While all that's happening, while in New York, Val has Bob, and this is where she is manipulating him, right? She's trying to convince him that he's special, he is the only one that survived the test, and he has a purpose, and she's the only one that can unlock his special powers or what have you. Landing on him, right? She can get him to get his full potential out of him, right? And this is, to me, again, this is just being a fan of just other stories and comic book stories. This relationship dynamic and this manipulation reminded me, from my boys fans out there, of Homelander and Madeline Stillwell, right? Minus the whole breast milk situation. But again, her manipulation of his powers, of his vulnerabilities, of his insecurities, of his fears, she's really playing into that. And again, this is where I say, okay, that is a Val. This is a Val that I haven't really seen before. They've played the kookiness of her getting John to the mix and manipulating, to a sense, getting Yelena to kill Hawkeye, which, by the way, little side tangent here. Why did Yelena still work with Val after she made her try to kill Hawkeye? Like, that was never addressed. And also, where's her giving her the intel on Hawkeye, or lying, saying that Hawkeye killed her sister? Was that her way of trying to kill off like OG Avengers so she can make her own team? Like, they never really addressed that. And also Yelena not questioning why she sent her to kill Hawkeye, never addressed. But as I digress, this is where another criticism that I'll talk about here in a second comes into fruition, and it's the only criticism I have about the Bob Century Void character, just in a second. But setting up the back half of this film as we kind of lead towards the end of this movie, we have them now in New York. The Thunderbolts get into the old Avengers Tower, which now goes by the name of Watchtower, and this is where the Thunderbolts discover that Val has turned Bob into the world's greatest superhero, the most powerful superhero known as the Century. Now, before we get into this really cool sequence of Century versus Thunderbolts, I gotta talk about a criticism that I have about the building of this character, Century, aka the Void, and all that stuff. There's a moment where we see him having this crash course of a sorts of using his powers with manipulating the glass and exploding the water or what have you. All that's cool, but then that was like 5 minutes. And we later on see him taking on the Thunderbolts with ease, and we'll break down that scene here in a second. I'm not saying I needed this Rocky montage, 20-minute sequence of him training, or him training for days, weeks, months, and years. I'm not saying all that. But the same criticism we hold to other characters that learn their powers pretty quickly, like I think of someone like Gia in that terrible show. We will not talk about Secret Invasion again in this video, in this discussion, but Gia, I was like, how did she get all her powers so quickly? And there's thousands of examples of how characters tap into a new ability and they're able to, I wouldn't say he's an expert, right? Like, he can overpower them without using his full abilities, which we see him holding back in the fight, but nonetheless, he's not an expert at his skills. But the flight, the manipulating the bullets, and we'll break down a scene further, but I was just like, there could have been a more creative way to explain to us that he has maybe been training. Just felt like he learned how to use even the basic skills way too quickly for me. Again, didn't take me out of the movie, but it is a criticism that I have, not just in this film, but in other projects, when, again, a character is able to use their abilities so quickly. Again, little nitpick that I just had to bring up. But now, breaking down the scene of Sentry versus the Thunderbolts. Again, I don't know if it's a matter of he was kind of feeling salty that they left him in the desert for dead, or if, again, I think it was more of the latter, which is Val got into his ear, manipulated him. She told him that they need to be taken down. Now, Val wanted him to kill them, but he just wanted to take them down, right? In a non-lethal way. And also, I got to talk about the suit. Suit's pretty cool. You know, she blinds. They do a whole marketing thing. Like, this is the new pitch. We got to dye your hair. We got to get you in a costume. We got to go by the Sentry, no longer Bob. So she, packages him up for the new Avengers, the power of all the Avengers in one character. So, again, I like the look. I like the vibe. But I love what we get to see with this character. Now, going back to 2022 when they announced Thunderbolts, and when they didn't announce that Sentry was a part of it, but it was whisperings that Sentry is going to be involved in the narrative. And us fans, again, more so those of the comic books, but even knowing a little bit that I knew about Sentry, we were all saying to ourselves, basically Superman, right? Sentry going against super soldiers and assassins. They don't have a Hulk. They don't have an Abomination. They don't have anyone with that level of power. How in the hell will the Thunderbolts take on Sentry? I think, personally, in my opinion, they handled that power scaling pretty damn well. Because I have an issue with power scaling in the MCU. I do not like, and this goes for any MCU, DC, anyone, right? The boys. When a story has to dumb down or power down a very powerful character just to fit the narrative of that particular story. Perfect example. How, again, I love Spider-Man, love Peter Parker, love Tom Holland, but in his movie, he was able to defeat, not on like a really bad level of like defeating Doctor Strange, but he was able to outwit Doctor Strange in the Mirrorverse, which was crazy to me, right? And listen, that's not just a movie thing, that's a comic book thing. Who the writer wants to win will win that story, but I'm not a fan of that, right? But in this film, they don't do that. He was holding back, and he was like, not necessarily playing with his food, but he was just like, come on, guys, this is silly. Like, stop. But I like the fight, man. We see him easily taking down these super soldiers in the Red Guardian, throws him out the window, throws him against the thing, takes out Ghost with ease. I mean, Yelena, man, like, she could have just set back, but she got slammed against the wall. Bucky, I love you, Bucky. My man took off his jacket and was like, all right, let's go. Boom, 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 swing, swing, swing. Now, Bucky, give me this arm. Let me beat you. Let me take your Wakandan Winter Soldier arm off. Dude, you got a metal arm. Shout out to Spider-Man. He hits him upside the head, and it's just like, come on. And they knew, and I love that they just ran out of the room. And Val's like, this is where the void starts to come about, right? Because as they go downstairs, they know they can't handle Sentry. Meanwhile, she's like, kill them, finish the job. He's like, I don't want to do that. And matter of fact, you're saying I'm a god. I didn't say you were a god. Well, you said I'm an Avenger, and the Avengers have a god, a.k.a. Thor. So, yeah, I am a god. Why am I taking orders from you? And this is where Val has the kill. Meanwhile, she had Mel doing the kill switch situation, and Mel hits the kill switch, and they kill Sentry as they think, but they really just triggered the void. But while that is happening, as we have the defeated Thunderbolts and Yelena's just laying it to them all, like, you suck, we all suck, we're all losers. What do we think that we were going to defeat them? We're not even really a team. We don't know how to work together. One of the best scenes, one of the most emotional scenes, and a great payoff. Again, such a great actress. Florence and also David did a good job where she calls him dad, right? And she tells him, she finally confesses, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I don't know what to do. And then he tells her the great line of like, you're a hero and taking up the mantle of your sister. And this is what you're meant to do. You're meant to lead. You can always solve the problems. I love that moment between two. Really good emotional moment. But then upstairs, the void is here. And let me tell you something, man. The visual look of the void, the black silhouette, and all you see is the goddamn eyes. That, in the literal, again, manifestation of loneliness, just the emptiness of the void and the look, that's perfect, man. That's some elite, top tier Marvel stuff. You ask me. The design of the void was great. takes out the helicopter, putting these people. And by the way, that scene when he takes out it's the girl, I think it's the little girl first, right? Because I love the superhero moment. I talked about the score being so awesome, and it felt like a superhero movie, like old school Spider-Man, right? We have them saving the civilians in the streets. We have them save the little girl. And when that little girl got into the void, and again, I'm not knowing the full extent of what the void really means. Like, are they dead? Are they gone forever? Are they like Thanos snapped forever? But when that little girl disappeared, I'm like, oh shit, this shit has hit the fan. Anyway, at this point, Yelena realizes, okay, I gotta find a way to defeat him. And sure, it might be corny in retrospect, like the power of love, the power of friendship, talking down a villain or whatever. I thought the way they handled it was pretty cool. She willingly walks into the void. Of course, Alexi's screaming and shouting and thinks that she's dead, right? But as she walks into the void, as we get into the last half of this film, which I honestly think, at least I won't say of ever, but I think this is one of the better endings of a Marvel film in a very long time. She makes her way into the void, and she's brought back to her memories when she was a kid, when she did her first mission and she got that little girl killed. And it kind of reminded me of that loop that we saw Dormammu, that Doctor Strange put Dormammu in back in 2016's Doctor Strange, but also kind of reminded me of the time loop that they put Loki in his TV show of just experiencing Sif keep hitting him and all that stuff. But it just puts her in one of the worst moments and most traumatic moments of her young life that she experienced of having that little girl killed. She's running that over and over and over again, but she eventually breaks through, right? And again, think about it on a deeper level, breaking through your trauma. Literally seeing her breaking through the wall. She lands on a table. She's brought back to another young memory where she's in the red room and they're doing who can load up the gun, assemble a gun quicker, and she won. And we saw the abuse on the other Black Widows. She makes it out of that room, breaks through that, right? She sees Bob in one of the mirrors. And by the way, before I keep going on, the reason I love this scene, for many different reasons, right? The visual manifestation of loneliness, darkness, and just the visuals of it all. It felt like Inception, Interstellar, but it also felt like y'all know me. If you've listened to my channel for a while, I'm a big horror fan. You know, the top three, Michael, Freddy, Jason. Talking about Freddy, Nightmare on Elm Street, this whole sequence, again, a little bit of Inception, a little bit of, Interstellar a little bit. It reminded me so much of Dream Warriors. We're in his dream. We're in his consciousness. We're in his mind. And he's all these things and trauma and horrors and scariness. Like, I love this sequence so much for so many different levels. But being a horror fan, it brought me back to Dream Warriors. But she goes to another level of her mind, and it's her, as she talks about earlier in the film, she relied on alcohol to suppress the pain, to push it down, as she says earlier to Bob in the film, and we see her self choking herself and doing it over and over again, but she eventually breaks through. She pushes through, right? She accepts those dark moments and trying to move past those moments. Again, it's such a relatable thing I think we can all relate to, feeling in our darkest moments, right? She finds Bob. He's in the attic, and this reminded me of Moon Knight. Was hit or miss for me as a show, but there was an episode, I believe it was episode 5 of Moon Knight. Light spoilers if you haven't seen that show. Again, mediocre, but had some moments, this being one of them. This episode is fantastic. I don't remember the title of the episode, but it was Mark Spector going into his memories and experiencing one of his saddest and most traumatic moments. And again, light spoilers on Moon Knight, is when his brother died and how his mom like completely shut him out. And what she did to him was she abused him because all she saw was the kid, her son, who was responsible for the death of her other son, which it wasn't the case. If you saw the show, you know what, it was an accident that he drowned. But anyway, that reminded me of that, but it was just on obviously a grander scale, and it just really hit home as far as, you see Bob, you see his trauma at a young age. He was wanting to be a hero since a young age, saving his mother from the abuse of his father. And we see, through the cracks of the attic, his mom being abused, he being abused, him trying to be the hero. And he telling Yelena, don't worry about, this is the safest spot, that I can go compared to my other trauma. So it was great, man. And, while that's going on, the other Thunderbolts are like, wait, what did you, because it was John Walker who had experienced, we saw one of his dark moments, which was when he lost the title and the mantle of being, Captain America and how he was, neglectful of his child and his wife. And again, we find out that they end up divorcing. She took his kid away, which explains why he's doing jobs for Valentina. He's alone. That they give him the information, and then they go into the void. But before they get into the void to save Yelena and Bob and figure out this whole situation of New York being consumed by the void and the darkness, Yelena talks to him. She convinces him, you can make it through, because I made it through. If I can make it through some of my darkest stuff, and not to compare, but she went through some dark shit, right? But she's like, if I can make it through, so can you. And he's like, yeah, I can. I believe, again, it's the thoughts of you don't have to fight your fears. You don't have to fight your loneliness and depression by yourself. You can always ask for help. So he agrees to get out of his own mind, your own worst enemy. But then the void is trying to attack them, throwing stuff at them. And this is where the Thunderbolts come in, and they, catch, the ripped teddy bear in the chair. But then they have to go through, they're like, all right, Bob, in order to go through this, we're going to go through this together. Let's go through your mind. We're going through the way Marvel put this together, and the visuals and the production team and the direction was so incredible. We're going through the darkest spots in his mind. One of them is him dressed as a chicken, just trying to get money for his addiction of drugs. And we see, that was so funny, him as a chicken on meth, no less. They punch out the burb, and then they finally go to Malaysia, where he had one of his first testings, becoming the void. And we saw what he did to those doctors, and the void's there. And the void, the voice, the look, everything was so great. The voice just talking to him, trying to convince him that you need to accept this. This is where you're the safest. Let me take over, right? Let the darkness consume you. And, the void is able to disarm the rest of Thunderbolts, and Bob is like, oh, you want to go against me? So they're fighting. The void allows him to win, because he wants him to lean into the darkness, right? And we see him punching. Yelena finally makes it out, and we get a really cool visual, again, in Inception vibes of her going through his obstacles of the mind, of the void, trying to get her off from saving Bob. And eventually she holds him, she hugs him, the rest of the team hugs him. As stupid, as silly, cheesy, whatever you want to call it might be, it can just be as simple as giving someone a hug, right? Telling someone you love them, checking in on people. It's little things that count, man, right? Not to get too preachy here, but it's those things matter. And just a simple hug, and embracing Bob, and telling him you don't have to fight this alone, and them all accepting their past. It's, again, the power of love defeats evil. Yes, it's cheesy as hell, but it's impactful. It is true. It's not all sun and rainbows. All of us have dealt or will at some point deal with depression and loneliness, but it is these little things like this. And this is why I love Marvel. And this is why I can see why some people have this as like their top tier. This moment here, speaks to a lot of us, and some people probably appreciate it more than others. But this is what Marvel can do. It's like, yeah, we love the popcorn, the spectacle, the grand stories, space opera. We love all that stuff. But when I think some of the more successful, some of the more memorable, some of the more impactful Marvel films to date, I think they resonate. And this is just movies in general, is moments like this, right? Yeah, $200 million blockbuster action movie that has a message, and a powerful message, and a relatable one, and a universal one that I thought really stuck the landing. So after the team convinces Bob that he doesn't have to do this alone, we see that they ultimately defeat the void, and they restore the light, and they bring back normalcy to New York City. So now, with the threat neutralized, we got one big bad out of the way in the void. Let's take down the creator of the big bad, and Valentina. And she's like, oh no, guys, don't worry about me. I'm sorry, I made a mistake, but give me 1 second. She's kind of walking back into this covered up tent, and it's very much an Avengers or like an Iron Man type of moment where, and even I think about Homecoming, Spider-Man Homecoming, when Tony set up the press conference to announce the new member of the Avengers. Well, similar homage in a way. They go through the tents, and the press is there, and Val introduces the world. She's like, this is what I've been working on. I'm not a bad guy. You don't impeach me. Which has its own social commentary in itself in the political landscape that we find ourselves in. But anyway, she announces a little asterisk of Thunderbolts, the new Avengers, which is led by, and also we have Yelena telling her, we own you now, right? So we're going to see how that plays into the mix of what that means, and if Val will be the Suto leader, the Nick Fury of the Avengers, but secretly taking orders because they know her secrets. So we'll see what comes of that relationship moving forward. But we have the new Avengers led by Yelena. We got Bucky, we got Red Guardian, we got Ghost, and we have John Walker, and we have unofficially Bob on the team. But that is the end of the film. And again, the asterisk of Thunderbolts is the new Avengers, which speculated things online. I was led to believe Dark Avengers was going to be the subtitle, but it's the new Avengers. And we'll get into what I think about that when we get to the post credits. But that's the end of the movie, man. Again, just generally speaking, I love the second half. I thought the first act was okay. To me, the first act brings down the film. To me, personally. It's not terrible by any means, but as I mentioned earlier, the pacing, the subplot with Mel, who I know some people thought she was going to be Songbird. And I like the actress. I think I saw her first in Cock Blockers with John Cena. She was good in that. And I think Ayo was initially cast in the role, and I'm glad she didn't take that role because it wasn't. Maybe Mel will get more to do in the future, but I'm like, y'all would have wasted Ayo in that role. But anyway, and the tale of two halves, the second half and particularly the third act, saved this film. I'm dramatic. To me, the second half made this film as what it is, which is a really solid Marvel Cinematic film, and I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5. So, with that out of the way, let's break down the mid-credit scene and the post-credit scene and what it can mean for the MCU moving forward. Now, the mid-credit scene is a stereotypical Marvel kind of joke, right? The Captain Americas of the world of like, oh, you waited here and you got nothing. We've gotten plenty of these kind of funny mid-credit scenes. This was kind of funny, right? And this is, we're at a random, I think like a Whole Foods or something at a grocery store, and there's a lady shopping in a cereal aisle, and we see the Wheaties box behind her with the new Avengers on the boxes, and we see Alexi, aka Red Guardian, encouraging her, a little nudge, hey, why don't you get some Wheaties? They're nutritionists, they're really good to eat, they heal your bones, but also notices on the cover, and obviously that's a callback to earlier in the film when he says all he wants to be is a part of a team, he wants to be a hero, and he wants the little toy in the Wheaties box, and now he got his dream has come true. So again, a funny moment in the movie, a great callback, a nice little stinger, a nice little funny joke in this mid-credit scene. But ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the big one, and that is the post-credit scene. Now, I'll just speak for myself, but in the last few phases, a lot of our post-credit scenes have been nothing burgers. They have just been things that are never going to come into fruition. I'm looking at you, Eternals. I'm looking with no Blade. I'm looking at things like Hercules and Thor, Love and Thunder, and who knows what's going to happen with the Guardians, if we're going to see that new team that we saw there. And I love the Guardians, but there's been so many post-credit scenes. I think right now, we're going to break this one down, but the biggest and most important one thus far, in my opinion, is the post-credit scene that happened, funny enough, in not so good movie, The Marvels. I think that's going to be very pivotal to Doomsday Secret Wars with Monica being in another world with the X-Men. But either way, this one is pretty damn big. Let's break it down. So in this post-credit scene, we skip 14 months ahead in time. These new Avengers have been the Avengers for 14 months since the ending of the film of the Thunderbolts, aka the New Avengers. And the media doesn't really like the New Avengers. And also, this calls back to one of my favorite credit scenes. Like the credits of the film is them with newspapers of how people don't like them. And I thought it was one of the coolest credit scenes we got in a long time. They're not liked. There's questions of who is the real Avengers. Should we trust these anti-heroes and whatnot? But it's been 14 months of this situation of them being the new Avengers. Bucky is talking about that Sam Wilson, aka Captain America, isn't a fan of the new Avengers. And let's just talk about this. I like Sam Wilson. I like him as a new Cap. He proved himself in his film. But I got to point you out, Sam. You might be the biggest hater in the MCU. Let me explain, ladies and gentlemen. Let me explain. This is the same Sam Wilson who didn't want to be Cap in his own show until it was announced that someone else, John Walker, was going to take the mantle and take the shield. And then he's like, no, I'm the Captain America, right? It's that guy. Mind you, this is the same guy that didn't take action for however many years from Captain America, Falcon and Winter Soldier, till we saw him in this film, Brave New World. 3 or 4 years. He could have assembled his own team. He even had the president give him authority to make his own team. But he said, no, we don't need the Avengers right now. It wasn't until Valentina and Bucky, his best buddy, his bromance brother, set up a team with Yelena. Then he's like, no, I am leader and I'm going to do the Avengers. Not you all. What's going on, Sam? Sam's a guy where he has to take action until someone else takes action. So I'm being funny, but I'm being serious at the same time. Some people think that there's going to be a beef between Bucky and Sam. It's going to be like the OG Avengers versus the new Avengers, potentially OG. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's literally like a wink, wink, nod, nod. But who's to say? There might be a beef there. I do think this does set up the concept, because we'll talk about this scene being literally taken out of a new movie coming out next year, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I do think this sets up the idea of multiple Avengers in Doomsday and Secret Wars, meaning that Sam might have his own crew. We have the Thunderbolts, aka the new Avengers from this film, but then there might be a West Coast Avengers with the young Avengers, the champions. So I think this might set up the idea that there's multiple teams that we're going to be seeing, at least in the foreseeable future. Again, Doomsday and Secret Wars will be in those two films. So something to think about. But back to the scene. New outfits, love all the new outfits, love the banter. The new Avengers with an S, that whole bit was funny. But then we get to the setup and a payoff that I know is going to come to fruition, unlike Hercules and the Eternals and all that stuff, Shang-Chi's of the world with the beacon. We have an alert go off, right? There's something going on out in space. There's a interdimensional spacecraft entering the Earth's atmosphere. They go up to the big screen and they see this really cool ship, and it turns over and we see a 4 on the side, and the score of the Fantastic Four plays. Chills, literal chills, even though I'll admit it was spoiled for me a day before I saw it. I saw it when I was scrolling on the internet, but neither here nor there. I still love the scene. I love what it sets up. But the question is, did that scene ruin Fantastic Four? We'll talk about that here in a second. Before we get into that question, I will say, if you all do not know, it was just revealed just a day after I'm recording this, before I'm recording this, or after I'm recording this. The director of this film, of the Thunderbolts, Jake, said that he didn't shoot that film, but some other people shot that film for a current Marvel film that's currently in production, aka the Russo brothers, aka that is a scene that's going to be potentially in Doomsday. Now, if you all recall, going back to 2017, 2016. Anyway, y'all recall Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man. The post-credit scene in that film was Civil War, a literal scene from Civil War. Russo brothers, I think they're doing the same thing. I think this scene that we saw in the post-credit scene will be a literal scene in Doomsday of showing this whole situation. There's different Avengers. There's some beef potentially between Bucky and Sam, but also there is a group of 4 coming from another dimension. But going back to my question, and also too, I love the suits. We're gonna see them looking like that in Doomsday. I love the look so far with the Russo brothers, and also the cinematography. Like, that is literally that's our first look, I guess you could say, of Doomsday. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's literally a scene that we will see in that film. But going back to my question, did seeing the Fantastic Four entering the Earth's atmosphere in the 616 in the Sacred Timeline, does that ruin their film coming out in a couple months? I'm 50-50. I'm yes and no. The yes of it all is, and this is just speculation, but a lot of us are led to believe that the way that their film, Fantastic Four, will end, Galactus wins, destroys their Earth, their planet, consumes their Earth, their planet, but they find a way to escape their Earth. So that may happen. That may not happen. Hell, they might defeat Galactus. Maybe it's Doom. Maybe we don't even know if the Fantastic Four are in that ship. Maybe that's Doom in that ship coming to their planet, the 616 Sacred Timeline. So again, that might have ruined Fantastic Four, but it might not have. And again, we don't know the context. Even if it is the first part, Galactus wins, they escape their planet, but their whole planet's destroyed. That might come to fruition, but we got to see the film. We got to see the context of the film and see the devastation and what it means to them and how they managed to, you would assume that Reed figured out a way to travel throughout the multiverse. So we got to see it. So again, I'm like, yeah, that might have given something away, but it might not have. Let me know what you all thought about it in the comments below. Not only what I just mentioned, but the post-credit scene in general, the implications of the new Avengers, a beef between Avengers potentially, and again, do you all think that us seeing the Fantastic Four ruins the ending of their film, Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. So with all that being said, I'm going to have some other little videos coming out in the coming days, rankings, so on and so forth. But I think that's a perfect place to end this video. So if you made it to end this video, thank you so much. Whether you're watching this on YouTube, again, I would appreciate a like, a share, leaving all your thoughts in the comments. Consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. If you're listening or watching this on Spotify, because you can't do that on Spotify, but if you are listening to this in podcast form, give this video a like, a full download. Give this video some comments. Let me know your thoughts about everything we discussed. And also consider following my podcast. Many more things coming with that, by the way. This is only the beginning. This is a soft launch, but that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all for watching. Remember, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.